Welcome to Mary's Eclectic Interests. My name is Susan Gainen. I'm a whimsical wildlife documentarian, and I get to be at home in my studio, which is frequented by whimsical creatures who come to sit for portraits and tell stories and eat my snacks. And I'm going to tell you some of their stories today. I'd like to talk to you about Sophie the opera bird. My mother's best friend back from World War II was Sophia, and I loved Sophia and her husband Gilbert very, very much, and they loved me back, which was very nice. But one of the things that they also loved in their life was opera. And they used to travel the world to see opera in many, many, many cities, but their favorite was the Santa Fe Opera House in Santa Fe, New Mexico. During several of their visits there, they made an acquaintance with Sophie the opera bird, who had nested outside their hotel window and who regularly attended the opera's performances. Now, when Sophie was at the opera, Sophie the opera bird that is, she was high in the wings, near the roof. And of course, my friends, who were very elderly at the time, had front row seats. But they would go back to the hotel and talk about the opera and talk about the costumes and the singing and was the conductor good, and they had a wonderful, wonderful time talking about opera. While they would have loved to invite her home to Maryland, Sophie Opera Bird was a true native New Mexican bird. And there are actually, by the way, 500 birds that are native to New Mexico. But she was absolutely unable to tolerate the temperatures in Washington, D.C., which were just very, very cold, or at least very, very cold for a New Mexican bird. The other problem with inviting Sophie Opera Bird home to Maryland was the cat, Okobee. Okobee lived to be 26 years old, and she actually ruled the house. And there is no possible way that Sophie Opera Bird would have been permitted into the house as long as Okobee was there. But Sophie and Gil had a lovely time in New Mexico. I love to paint flamingos. I think they're graceful and I think they're beautiful. I don't like being around them because, quite frankly, in the wild, they are very, very stinky. These three flamingos are doing what flamingos always do, which is eat. And that's that posture where they're looking down, they're looking for food. And the two pink flamingos eat brine shrimp because that's where their color comes from. And the other, the blue flamingo, I'm not really sure, perhaps he eats blue crabs. It's not clear to me, and he's not telling. But these are wonderful, wonderful flamingos to paint, not to talk to, and not to be around, because truly a memorable smell if you visit flamingos. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, and St. Paul, Minnesota happens to be a very important location for energetic, entertainment-oriented flamingos. This group of flamingos, the party flamingos, they live in a house actually not too far from mine. It's very well sound insulated, and they are an a cappella group, and they sing and they sing. They actually do a little dancing. I haven't been able to see that, but they sing a lot and they travel a lot because they are performance flamingos. They also are available for disco parties and for housewarming parties. It's quite the sight to open up your door one morning and see all of these flamingos on your lawn. They are much more energetic than plastic pink flamingos, and they really do have a lot of fun. They are, but they are, after all, flamingos, and quite frankly, they're kind of stinky. So it might be a nice prank to play on somebody to get these flamingos on your lawn, but that's up to you. That's at your discretion. But they are party flamingos. There is no animal husbandry in my family. Going back unto the generations, nobody was a farmer. Nobody raised any animals ever, ever, ever. So when I came to Minnesota in 1992, there was no reason for me to run to the state fair to the animal barns, because why would I? Plus, they're stinky. But in 1996, it was a cool day at the fair. It was about 70 degrees. And I went into the sheep barn. I don't know why I picked a sheep barn, but I went into the sheep barn. And there on the other end of the barn, all the way across the barn, was a purple lamb. And I was so excited because I was a fiber artist then, and I was so excited because they were finally growing wool in my color. And so, mind you, I'm a good citizen, so I did not run. I walked briskly all the way across the sheep barn and got to about 10 feet in front of this poor little lamb who had been shorn and was wearing a purple lycra suit to stay clean and warm. I was devastated. I was so disappointed, but I got over it slightly. Some years later, I painted the purple ram in this picture and made the image with the 9 different color rams, and I did that in Photoshop, which is a wonderful thing. But I named it 9 Lambs, a fiber artist's dream. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, honey, it's not a lamb, it's a ram, it's got horns." So, as I said, no animal husbandry in my family. I would not have had the slightest clue about how I should have known that. But I do love these, and they are really a fiber artist's dream. So think about the fiber artists you know and give them yarn. Peter the tattooed parrot is about 4 feet tall now. But when he was a tiny parrot, he was much smaller, obviously, but he also was having trouble learning to talk. And his parents sent him to a pediatric avian audiologist, and they sent also his friends too, so they all went together. So there's Peter Parrot and Polly Parrot and Paolo Parrot and somebody else Parrot. There were 5 of them. They went to the pediatric avian audiologist to learn how to talk. And they had a wonderful time, and they learned how to talk. But one of the ways that they learned to talk was they went on field trips, and they went to the zoo, and they would look, and the doctor would say, "Who is that?" And they would say, "That's a giraffe." And they would say, "Who is that?" That's a horse. And who is that? That's a zebra. They went on lovely field trips, and that's how they learned to talk. But that's Peter. Now, but he got his tattoos in a funny way. He loved color, and he was not a very colorful parrot. He came from a gray parrot family, and he was jealous of all the colorful parrots. So he saved his paper route money, and he got all those wonderful tattoos. And he's many colors. He's very tall, and he stands out wherever he goes. But he is Peter the tattooed parrot, and he can talk very well too. I am a whimsical wildlife documentarian, and I live on a path and flyway, and whimsical creatures come to my studio. They sit for portraits, and they tell stories, and they also eat my snacks. About 4 months ago, I was very surprised to go down for breakfast and find 40 flying pigs in my studio. Flying pig like this one. Turns out they had come to St. Paul because to set up a world headquarters of the flying pigs and flying elephants, flying pigs and friends actually. They had come because St. Paul apparently is a really good place for flying pigs. It's very safe, it's very clean, and they had not a lot of trouble getting flight licenses because they're smarter than they're not drones, they're not airplanes, they're not kites. They got a special license from somewhere in the government in Minnesota, and so that's why they set up their flying pigs headquarters here. Now, the first setup was at an art gallery, and now there are flying pigs, small outposts in other art galleries and in people's houses. People host flying pigs. And the wonderful thing about a flying pig is that when people sometimes are down in the dumps, they'll say, oh, I won't be able to get this project on the road. I won't be able to get it done. Nothing's going to happen until pigs fly. And if you happen to have a flying pig in your pocket, you can say, here, take this pig. The pigs are flying. Now go get your project done. So the pigs are here on a mission. They wanted to set up in a place where they could fly a lot. But they're also here to encourage people to get on with the things that they need to do. People often wonder what watercolor artists do with leftover watercolors, and I found out what I was going to do with them in May of 2012 when I discovered that I could make paper mosaic creatures, and I did. So you can see all of these little pieces are from, or you have to believe me, that they're from leftover watercolors. This is Helena equus papyrus, that's Greek or Latin, and she is from the genus Papyrus, which is a subclass of mammals. The Small Friends Research Institute, which sponsors my research and my work with Whimsical Creatures, has a staff dedicated to finding safe environments for paper mosaic creatures. Helena is based on a horse image that I saw in Sacramento, and she often goes back to Sacramento to visit that horse painting. She's also very, very active in the organizations that care for retired racehorses, and which she thinks is very, very important and would like your support. Support old racehorses, she would say to you. Sometimes when creatures come to visit me to sit for portraits and tell stories and eat snacks, they come in family groups. And this is a group, these are two cousins. We have the great cave penguin and the great stained glass penguin. The cave penguin is from the lost cave paintings of St. Paul, which I imagine and excavate from the comfort of my living room studio, which, unlike real caves, is remarkably free of rats and bats, and has electricity and is not going to cave in. The cave, Minnesota, as you may know, is riddled with caves. We have caves everywhere. Some of them in St. Paul were used by bootleggers to hide their liquor, and people have used them to grow mushrooms. But Minnesota, everywhere in Minnesota, you can find caves. And I love discovering, imagining, and creating and discovering cave creatures because they tell about a world that is unknown to us. And I've found, in addition to the penguin, I've found lobsters and elephants and toucans and frogs and all kinds of birds in these caves in the lost cave paintings of St. Paul. And frankly, who is going to argue with me when I say there were elephants and toucans and penguins in our caves? I don't think so. The stained glass penguin is part of a family of stained glass creatures that were originally made in the 1870s in Italy. A glass artist who lived across the street from Geppetto, you remember him, he made Pinocchio. And Pinocchio, as you know, got starred in a major motion picture and became worldwide famous. The stained glass creatures were made for a guy, he wanted a nobleman, he wanted them in his castle garden. And so they stayed in Italy for a very, very, very long time until after, from 1870 until after World War II, when somehow they came to the United States. Many of them live on a big estate in Long Island, but they've had a lot of adventures, some of which they're not willing to tell. But the stained glass penguin came to visit me here in Minnesota, and he was very elegant and very dignified and very funny. He tells very funny bird jokes, none of which I can tell. This is community television, and I can't tell his jokes. But He's quite funny. I had never heard of pangolins until I read about them in the National Geographic. Turns out they're relatives of anteaters, and they live in Asia and Africa, and surprise, surprise, they eat ants and termites. Peter pangolin was, and often, sadly, they're killed for bushmeat. Peter pangolin was a sickly little pangolin. He didn't like ants and termites. Nobody was interested in killing him for bushmeat. But he's a lucky pangolin because, fortunately, he was found by a wonderful person from Veterinarians Without Borders. She put him in a little sack and sent him home to her family in France. And her family in France is generations and generations of truffle hunters. And they loved Peter. They fattened him up and got him, and they introduced him to truffle hunting. Turns out he's a great truffle hunter because he's really good at finding them, and unlike pigs and dogs, he doesn't like to eat them. So he makes lots and lots of money. One weekend every month, he goes into Paris to meet with his friend, the French llama. And they have adventures, but it's a tradition for them. They march up and down the Champs-Élysées. They have café au lait, and then they go to Sophie Finkelstein's boulangerie on the Rue de Rosiers, which is in the old Jewish quarter, and they have Sophie's fabulous apple cake, which is the best apple cake in the world. They are wonderful, wonderful friends, and one of the wonderful things about being a whimsical wildlife documentarian is that I get to introduce my friends to one another. So Peter and French are best friends, and I'm happy for them. Thank you for joining me today at Mary's Eclectic Interest. I'm happy, happy, happy always to share stories of my small friends and their friends, and we're happy that you joined us today. Thank you.